I work with time as a collaborator. Ephemeral means just something that's temporary, that's not meant to last forever. The building of the sculpture is like a breath in, and when the sculpture comes down, it's the breath out. It's a very natural, cyclical process. My name is Ruth Ju-shih Li. I'm a Taiwanese-Australian artist based on Wallumedegal Land, and that's in Darug country in the north of Sydney. I was born in Taiwan, grew up in New Zealand, and spent most of my life here in Australia. I grew up in a very creative family. Like my dad was a sound engineer, and so we grew up, learning multiple instruments, doing art, moving around across different cultures and countries. Definitely had a big impact on shaping who I am as a person. It taught me empathy. It taught me there's no such thing as normal, and the world's a big place. And it taught me how to communicate not just via language, but in different ways, and how to build connections and look for common ground. I think that became really essential to me as an adult and to me as an artist. Yeah. I kind of got into art school by accident. I accompanied a friend who needed someone to translate for him and help him navigate a lot of the processes of applying to art school. And I think he needed a friend as well. So I went through the whole process with him and I applied to art school as well. And very surprisingly, I got in with my drawing portfolio. And it was either that or become a scientist, do science at UCID. And so I jumped to art school. So I think no matter what I ended up studying, I think I still would have done or be doing what I'm doing. I guess art gave me a platform to express it in this way. Yeah. I first started doing residencies really out of necessity because Sydney, where I live, was very, very expensive. It still is very, very expensive. And as a young artist, freshly graduated from art school, didn't have a studio, didn't have the funds or anything, residency was a way for me to be able to go and have a dedicated space and time to create works. So that was just a very practical way for me to keep making art. It definitely helped me shape the way I look at art. It's a wonderful privilege and luxury of immersing oneself in another culture, being welcomed into another culture, and living amongst the people and day to day having conversations, enjoying different cuisines, which is amazing. But to be able to hear their stories, their family stories, their parents' story, their grandparents' story, that's just like a really beautiful experience and has definitely informed my practice. Yeah. I work with a lot of different ephemeral materials, but my favorite is raw clay. Because clay is such a humble and mundane material, it's very accessible. I think every culture has ceramics or clay as part of their tradition. From the terracotta chai cups in the streets of Delhi to imperial porcelain in the ancient kilns of Jingdezhen. I feel like clay and ceramics is everywhere and everybody has access to it as well. Clay is also the most common material for the creation stories across mythologies, across cultures. It's not the only material, but it is the most common one. The closest material for me as a representation of myself when I'm creating self-portraits, yeah. So I make site-specific ephemeral work in installations, and ephemeral means just something that's temporary, that's not meant to last forever. So I create works with materials in its transitional state. So raw clay, wax, ice, And I work with time as a collaborator to create kind of moments. My work is an abstract self-portrait. It is a portrait of me coming to terms with my ephemerality and of me returning to the earth and then being recycled and then created into new works over and over again. I choose to see like flowers as representations of the self instead of a sculpture that physically mimics my physical nature. I feel like this is more true to my essence than like a photograph of me. So all of my flowers are abstract, they're not real flowers. I don't believe in mimicry and copying. I feel like real flowers are already perfect and beautiful and they already exist. I don't really see a point in trying to copy it exactly and recreate it. I want to tap into the very creative essence of it. So what is it? And what about it do I like? And isolate that and then go back to my studio and recreate something that's my own. Traveling to different countries and doing residencies and creating work in different places has really shown me that different cultures interpret things very, very differently. I don't want my work to have the burden of flower language. So an example I always make is the chrysanthemum. So in Australia, they're called big mamas. We buy them for Mother's Day and we give them to our moms. But in Chinese culture, that flower is a funeral flower and you would never give it to your mom while she's still alive. That is very rude and disrespectful. And vice versa for, say, the white lily. That's a funeral flower here in Australia, but in Chinese culture, it symbolizes grace and elegance and purity, and people have it in their bouquets for weddings. So it's interesting to see these differences, but it also reminds me to tread softly. I started making ephemeral work as a personal meditation and a private kind of prayer. It was during a period of my life where I lost someone very precious to me, and my father and my brother were both going through chemo as well. And being the primary caretaker for my brother, I didn't have the time or the energy to maintain a practice or have a studio. So I would make these clay things and just squish them in my hands and leave them out in the backyard, and the rain would slowly disintegrate it and melt it away, and I felt, you know, my pressure and tension leave my body. And so that was always very private. It was very vulnerable and personal. It was a private meditation and a prayer. In 2018, I was invited to a fully sponsored residency in Thailand, and that year I was also offered my first solo show with a gallery that I was going to sign with. So I was under a lot of pressure and I was going through major imposter syndrome. I felt like I wasn't worthy of all the good things that were happening to me. So I did something quite unprofessional. I called up the residency director 2 weeks before the residency, and I was like, you should cancel me. I'm not worth your sponsorship money and you should give that sponsorship to someone else. I was very lucky. I've been surrounded by a lot of very kind and generous people and supportive people in my life, and he just said, just come to the residency. Your job is to sit by the beach. And so I was given space and the time without obligation to really dive deep into what it is that I really wanted to do and why I was feeling this way. At that point, I was ready to give up being an artist. So I just thought, okay, if I'm going to give up, then I might as well do something I've always wanted to do and just go out with a bang. So I made my ephemeral work public for the first time. I was very lucky that I had a lot of positive feedback and a lot of support. Yeah, because my ephemeral practice has always been very, very private. It was my own kind of private meditation and prayer, and it wasn't something that I associated with my art practice. So that was the first time I brought it forward publicly. So during that residency in Thailand, and when I built the ephemeral work publicly for the first time, it was also rainy season in Thailand. So I just built this sculpture, and then we lifted it up and put it under the frangipani tree. And when it would rain, it would trickle through down the leaves and then onto my work and slowly melt it. And it melted in one afternoon. It was very quick. So a lot of my work were actually left outdoors and surrendered to nature, which was part of my meditation, is that surrendering of your ego, of control, and coming to terms with, you know, transitional nature of life and my ephemerality. I wanted to share this process of how I navigate grief, because I also do a lot of volunteer social work, and I definitely see a need for this and how we don't like to speak about grief. And so maybe the things we can't put into words, we can put into art, and people can participate in that way. So as I've started to invite people to participate in my work, either collaboratively making the sculpture together or joining me in my watering ritual, I think it's another lesson in letting go again, because as artists we have a certain pride, or I guess like quality control over our work, but when you invite collaborators, there are lots of pleasant surprises, and sometimes the unexpected happens, and it's a lesson again and again of letting go of your ego, letting go of control, and allowing things to be, and it's a lesson every time. Yeah. A lot of people ask me if I feel sad when the sculpture collapses. The short answer is no, but the long answer is because my practice stems from that meditation. It was always a way for me to let go of tension. I've never seen that as destruction or felt sad about it returning to the earth. Recently I had the wonderful opportunity to bring a work of mine back to my ancestral homeland in China. So it's called Topography of Memory, and it's an abstract family tree across 3 generations of my family, navigating war, forced separation, exodus, but ultimately it's about, you know, resilience and reconnection and healing. It's made up of a series of aerial roots, which is inspired by the banyan tree, which is very abundant in my grandmother's hometown of Tainan. And these trees will grow through buildings. They're great, and to me it's just a symbol of strength and resilience in difficult times. I chose to use that imagery and that symbol to symbolize my family, and I made this installation first commissioned by Foy Centre for Contemporary Asian Art here in Sydney on Wallumedegal Land, and then I've had a few opportunities to take it around Australia, and this is the first time I've brought it to Asia and back to my ancestral homeland, so this has been a really special experience. Yeah. After creating ephemeral work, it has allowed me to think about these questions, like how do we place value, how do we calculate that, how do we weigh things against each other, and especially with women, with our bodies, you know, anti-aging, all of that, this new wave of egg freezing. It creates this kind of misconception that time is not worth living or spending if we're not being productive, or if we're not valuable in the sense of what other people or society or what's commonly deemed valuable. It's been a very interesting experience. I'm grateful for so many people, generous people in my life that has given me time, support, or the platform, or given me their trust, that without them and these opportunities I would not be where I am or be able to develop my work the way I have been developed. So I'm extremely, extremely grateful.